Happy Thursday, everyone. I'm Joan Gracie, and I'm here with my strategic partner, Eric Nealens, and we welcome you to our Facebook Live. We're really excited to be with you today, and I can assure you that this is live, so telephones will be ringing. We're in our front room. We might have somebody coming in. No birds will be chirping, but you kind of get the message if indeed we have some interruptions through our conversation. So we're very excited about our inaugural event. This is the first time that we're actually going live with our formal introduction. So we're excited, to tell you about some of the work that we've been doing behind the scenes, some of the work that we have planned for the future over our brief time together today. And certainly we're more than happy to answer any questions that you may pose during our Facebook time together. And we'll also give you some contact information at the end that feel free to message us directly. So just a brief highlight on my background before I turn it over to Eric. I've actually been in the recruiting space for, hard to believe now, 3 decades, and my business has grown well beyond just that whole identification piece. Not because it had to, frankly, it was because I wanted it to. With the changing landscape of the talent shortage, how difficult it is to identify an impact performer and then retain and develop them, I've really moved my intellectual property into a new space where I wanted to better understand the mindset of the job seeker, the mindset of the employer. So we're going to talk about our little mini research lab. Certainly Eric is going to share his knowledge from a PhD perspective and kind of what made us join together and what we are very excited to believe is a great venture going forward. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, this really has been a great opportunity to work with Joan and APA Solutions. So just a little bit about me. I did receive my PhD, even though I look like I'm fresh out of high school, I promise you that. From the University at Buffalo, so right around the corner from here, in behavioral neuroscience, one of our branches in psychology, and during my grad school career was really interested in how do you apply the same principles you do in that traditional laboratory setting, but now to the community at large. How is it that you can apply the same empirical evidence that you would to answer those exact questions you had? Why do we think the way that we do? Why do we act the way that we do? And how do we overcome some of these barriers that we know in the research world that are commonly found in our day-to-day careers? And when I now had this opportunity to work with you as a great partnership then to collaborate a lot of the research that is out there with the individuals who are doing the job at hand. And that's where I think a lot of our work and our partnership and collaboration has really and will likely produce some very fruitful things in the future.
And I just think it's so fascinating because I always kind of go back to this whole ebony and ivory thing in that, we're coming at it from these different perspectives, because certainly you're coming at it from a scientific standpoint.
Right. I'm
coming at it from practical experience, right? And I think that marriage is so impactful because together, I can say, yeah, that's great in the lab, but this is what I'm seeing in the field. This is what I'm hearing from. And I guess what I'm consistently amazed about, because I coach leaders and presidents and a lot of C-suite type of individuals about, and I guess the best way for me to describe it is, I don't know if you saw that movie Concussion, but it was very interesting about how that no matter what, all the science he had, right, and the autopsies and the dissection of all these brains, there was like this disbelief that this could be happening, that you could have this type of force on the brain and you'd have these residual effects, because it didn't make sense to me and it wasn't comfortable for me and it wasn't profitable for me and all those hidden things. And I think in so many instances, a lot of the work that I do and a lot of what I share about this 3-pound command center is received almost like voodoo or mad science or uncomfortability in that, why is this now? Why? Because I would imagine, how long have they even had neuroscience within the university sector?
Right. I mean, for the longest time, it was always thought of this behind the curtains area of science, and it was an elite club. You had to have your degree, you had to have all this research experience, and and then you're able to join in the conversation. But really, a lot of the funding agencies, even such as the National Institute of Health, NSF, really now has it where the perspective should be research are working on behalf of the taxpayer. That's where ultimately these grants come from. And now it's really our responsibility, or the research community's responsibility, to inform the community, to make them aware of these results. And that's, I think, excuse me, that's been a big focus now for the last probably decade or so. And now you're seeing, I think, this huge integration of the neuroscience as this interdisciplinary approach, not just in the scientific community, but how do you apply it at large?
Right, right, and it's so fascinating because obviously I've done a lot of studying with David Rock and the Neuro Leadership Institute, and will continue to do so. But when you look at the timing that you're talking about, it really kind of falls into line with him leaving the international sector and taking his research and findings and saying, you know what, there's nobody really mainstreaming this into leadership.
Right.
And as you look at insight, what's amazing to me that, and I just did a keynote last evening, if I say DISC or StrengthsFinder or Myers-Briggs or something along those lines, 90% of the room raises their hands. And I always think that, of course they do, because it's this bite-sized piece that measures behaviors that we can understand and we could be attracted to, right?
Yeah.
And anything else is just almost like overwhelming, if you will.
Yeah.
So people get the behavioral piece, which is taking you to this mental insight, taking a piece inside of this command center and bringing these levels of awareness so that you can make better decisions. So you could be more informed about what's happening in your unconscious level versus your conscious. And I see the arguing people have there.
Right.
You know, with their disc, well, I was up late last night, Joan. If they don't agree with it, if they don't like it, they always have this profound excuse as to why they didn't do well on this test versus assessment.
Yeah.
So again, I think so much of the work that we're talking about and so much of what it is honestly taking that first step for leaders, for your staff members, for owners to be able to say that your mindset matters. And there has been great work done over the past 10 years in this neuroscience space. And you have to really start to open up your mind to consider it.
Right. And that's a huge barrier, though, is that we have these almost preconceived notions, whether you call them the fixed mindset mentality.
We love that.
Yeah, right.
We love
that's certainly a big term right now that you're seeing. And it certainly is congruent with the belief that that's the way we like to operate, and that once we get into these patterns or scripts or the use of these stereotypes and schemas, we operate within those. We operate within that framework. And we have a hard time that once they're established, changing them. But my question always is while you may think that you're doing the right thing, of course you're going to be biasing that yourself. And then it now takes another individual or the willingness now to see that you may not necessarily be correct to now see how you can actually improve what you're doing. And that's a really big crux, I would say, for a lot of the scientific community is your opinion may not necessarily be the correct one. How do you now find out what those obstacles are and those barriers are for you to succeed?
And it was really interesting when I was reading Immunity to Change and looking at how, certain behavioral types, I suppose we all have almost this filter over our brain that if a new concept is overwhelming, we hijack ourselves right to threat, if you will.
Right.
So it's like, well, don't go above and beyond your thought patterns, because if you do, that's going to get uncomfortable because the brain can't pattern it. And I see, again, the bulk of the population who responds and says, well, you know what, this is awesome. But then why is your company stuck at 20 million?
Yeah, right.
Why is your company stuck at 40 million? And, people say, well, do I have the skills? My response is, do you have the mental bandwidth?
Right.
Are you prepared to go from where you are with this amazing fixed intellectual mindset, but now add some growth to it?
Yeah.
Challenge yourself in ways you've never challenged yourself before.
Right.
And expand on those thoughts in a way that truly can support more of what it is that you want to accomplish. Because now what we know is this isn't this fixed asset.
Yeah.
Now the plasticity and all these things that we know about the brain could make leaders even stronger. So when I hear the response, well, you know what, we are profitable, or I am a good leader, I still kind of wonder, well, I'm sitting with you. So something's got to be going on that's amiss. Right? But the other point of it is but how great could you be? So you're good, but how great could you be?
Right, and we're always kind of that bias that from our own standpoint, if things are going well, why on earth would you now call in for help, right? It isn't until that emergency is there, the crisis is there, do you then see it. But think of all the things that could have happened to prevent that. And what research can you now borrow from that could have prevented that call? And that's one of the things I know from our conversations and our work so far together has really been, how can you then take this opportunity to really then improve yourself? How can you now make it so that you're not just at your status quo, but really now improve the work that you're doing, using a lot of these empirical things? Again, we now have the evidence that we can now rely on to suggest why these things are happening. Not just our opinions, but let the data, let the facts speak for it.
Yeah, and we have a question from our producer, Austin. So
Yes.
we're gonna take a question.
Pam asks, can you give an example of how one would expand their mindset?
So I guess I'm gonna like an exercise or something along those lines. I don't know. How would you address that question?
I think a great idea of these kind of fixed mindset is the sense that we fall into what we call these heuristic fallacies, is the technical term for them. But we kind of get these little, what I call cliff notes about how the world works, right? And then we kind of operate within them. And so for you, I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here. So before I came in, we were talking about cars, and let's say, for example, that you're thinking of getting a new car, $50,000, and you now haggle the guy down to $40,000. How do you feel?
I feel great.
Feel great, right? An extra $10,000 I was able to get. But what if that same car now was at auction, started at $20,000, and now got bid up to $40,000? How do you feel now?
I don't feel good.
Right, because it started at that different point, right? And so what we call the anchoring effect here in the psychological world. In reality, you should feel the same. It's still $40,000 that you're going to have to now leave from your bank account. And we don't think that way. We think that if we put ourselves in that first situation, that's a great deal, right? So this is that business that thinks they're doing great because I now made more this year than I did the year before. But what if you found yourself in the other end of it, where you're in a business and now you're not doing necessarily as well? It's all relative.
Right.
And one of the things I think that is really quite important then is having this opportunity to realize that this mindset can change, and that it takes an outside perspective, maybe an extra consultant or someone who's not in your landscape, to now come in and say, you know what, if you did this, you might even see more improvement than what you think that you're doing. Or if you think you're in a rut, here's what you are doing well. Capitalize on that, and you can now do better. Because from our perspective, we're so limited a lot of times that what we think is good isn't necessarily the case.
Yeah, and I would definitely follow up and say with, working out, because certainly it's an organ that acts like a muscle, is doing something that's uncomfortable. When I decided that I wanted to be a public speaker, people are shocked. I hated public speaking. I hated it. I mean, it wasn't unusual for me to have the butterflies and the shaking of my speech. I mean, the whole 9 yards. But you start with a small group and you get bigger and you get bigger. And I got elected to be a president of an association that had 650 members. I'm like, my natural inclination was turn it down. I mean, that was so scary. So again, I think that anything that seems uncomfortable or unusual or you can't pattern, if you could just do one thing and see and repeat it, this new habit, if you will, and just repeat it to such the extent, that's an exercise that you can see the fruit of. So when I tell people that, they're always amazed. They're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe, why would you have ever done that? Because this is really, I want to affect more people than my APA clients. I want to do it through my not-for-profit. I want to do it through the Women Up initiative. Right. I want to have a bigger voice. And in order to have a bigger voice, you have to get comfortable in being uncomfortable.
Right. Yep.
And I think that is so underrated. I just wrote on Twitter yesterday, God, if I could get rid of an F word, it would be failure.
Mm-hmm.
I hate that freaking word, and the damage it makes on you neurologically. We ingrain it in our children, we ingrain it in our managers. But when I talk to guys from Silicon Valley, Eric, it's not even in their vocabulary. They don't even know that F word. So it gets back to your perception and things of that nature.
Yeah, how do you define what failure is necessarily?
Exactly. You use other people.
Right. Or it's a possibility that, what if now, because you can't accept that failure, that now you are pigeonholing yourself and limiting what you're able to do. And
Great
now,
point.
what we talk about here is the stereotype threat. So the notion now that I can't do these things because no one else is doing it, or it doesn't fit into what the community's perception is about me based on my age, or my gender, or my sex, or my race. And who's to say that necessarily is true? What evidence do you have to actually support that? And that's the question I always go back to people with is, show me the evidence that you can do that. And that's what I think is so important that we're able to discuss.
And I think, again, from the Women Up movement that I've been able to wrangle you to get involved in. And again, I don't know, you're the expert. I obviously follow the math and science. I love the data. It again, for another time when we're together, I'd love to really get into why there's such reticence to push back on math and science. Mm-hmm. Because again, I see it every day in my work. I know you see it every day in the work you're doing, and so I wanna expand on that and really get into it. But the truth of the matter is for women, we don't have the same type of brains that a men do. Mm-hmm. And there are different compartments, if you will, because I always take the layman's route and talk about filing cabinets and things that are a lot less technical, and
yep.
you allow me to do that, and I thank you for that, because it really connects to more of even my most technical people that I coach. But for women, I think there is this stereotype mm-hmm. that we prescribe to and buy into.
Right.
And I see it so much in the work I do, whether it's recruiting, mm-hmm. whether it's retention, whether it's development. And when I got to you and asked you to get involved with the conference, what I loved about your response was, and I just gave you like a carte blanche of like, this is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Why did you do that?
Well,
why was that like your first response? You gave me one and only response.
Yeah.
So clearly.
Well, again, I think it's no obvious truth that, again, data is what really drives me. Like, data is really where we should be going. And I remember one of my dissertation professors always saying that when you read an article, that results section of the data is pure. And that's really what we should be going towards. And so when I look at data, and live in this really interesting time where both men and women equally seem to populate the workplace, right? So we got both men and women that are now really providing for the community and making an impact on the community at large. A time where probably this hasn't happened historically. But what always fascinates me then is that when you look at the STEM-related fields, so the sciences, the technology, engineering, and math, it's not a 50-50 split. You still see men predominantly will be about 75% of those jobs. Mm-hmm. So why the disparity? Mm-hmm. And I know that you say that yes, there is differences physiologically between men and women in their brains. But I always go back to the question of, if you look at IQ levels, typically on average you're going to see the IQ of 100 the same between men and women. So from a capability standpoint, mm-hmm. roughly the same. Then why the disparity between the two? Mm-hmm. Why would it be then that you see that in these fields that culturally we put on a pedestal and we really value them? And I think that is important. Why is it then that it's still dominated by men? Mm-hmm. And that's something that I want to go into more detail about at this conference and talk about what does some of the literature say about stereotype threats? What is it then about these particular demographics, whether it's women and race, what impact can that have with our success? And mm-hmm. what I think is also important is that what does the evidence say about how we can overcome this? Mm-hmm. How is it possible that you can now take this and look at it as some type of opportunity to actually break beyond that barrier, to go through that glass ceiling?
Yeah, and it's just so interesting because when we decided to have a women's conference, we had one years ago, but there hadn't really ever in the history of Western New York, as I knew it, one conference where everybody was coming together, mm-hmm. all the generations. right? Because now, to your point, people were saying last evening at my event, well, people in their 80s, I have news for you. I coach a gentleman who is 83 years old.
Right.
All right? So these are the realities. And I'm not going to lie, I'm probably going to be one of those 83-year-old people. So, so I think that, again, when you look at the different generations that are, represented within the workforce, our goal was to start a conversation.
Yeah.
It wasn't, in a day-long event that we think we were going to solve, world peace. But what became abundantly clear is that we first introduced, we had a PhD from the University of Buffalo, Mara Huber, who was wonderful. And she, just spoke briefly about, some of the recent information. And she tailored it very, very strategically to women. And just the way in which she presented it really resonated. So it's just this introduction of what's happening here.
Mm-hmm.
And that, we call it a lot of things, but what we don't call it is really our mindset, our brain. This is the way we think. And just introducing that concept, introducing insight, introducing how much this mindset matters.
Mm-hmm.
I think anybody who's considering attending this conference and anybody who has a daughter in high school,
yeah.
I mean, I know we already have like 20 students signed up, which I think is amazing.
Yeah.
And it's really about, let's show these young women the opportunities that exist out there. And if they are having this negative self-talk, to recognize it.
Right.
Because I think, again, so many times when we have this negative self-talk, we have somebody talking to us, and it could even be ourselves that's saying, oh, well, that's hormonal.
Mm-hmm.
Which I freaking hate, but happens all the time anyways. Well, that's hormonal, or you must be going through this, or you're that, or whatever the case may be. Versus really understanding that, again, this could be something self-inflicted that we deposited in our mental filing cabinets,
right.
and it's working against us.
Right.
And I love that's why when you went over the presentation with me and what you're going to be covering, I think people are going to be walking out of there saying, am I doing this?
Right.
And it's just that question.
Yeah, it's the whole goal, really, just to now be aware that these things happen and that that's the way that humans are designed to work and why our brain works the way that it does, and provide some insight into what could be some of these barriers that are preventing your career success. Or if you're going into a particular area, what obstacles can you now overcome to help you get to that next level?
And what I love about what it is that we're doing, because I've been to a lot of conferences, and what I love about it is, here's the issue, it sucks to be you. And then you leave, and you're like, oh my gosh, what do I do with this, right? What I love about what it is that we're doing is we're raising these topics,
mm-hmm.
and we're giving you solutions.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's great about our half day,
yeah.
is that we're going to be providing solutions in these bite-sized pieces. So when you feel this wave coming on, you can do the self-argument.
Right.
Austin, did you have another question that came?
We actually had a really great comment in regards to mindsets and the concept of failure. Jennifer mentioned, I believe communication and how we communicate to others also helps in eliminating the concept of failure.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, that's such a great point, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think about, growing up and working in the 80s when Winning Through Intimidation was the bestseller. I mean, when you really look at what the bestsellers were during that decade, it was like, I really have to make you feel bad about yourself.
Yeah.
And now when you look at it neurologically, oh my gosh, that couldn't be
Right.
a more
Right.
terrible leadership style. But again, how many of us were brought up with that?
Right, exactly. It's a lot easier to lead a horse to water than it is to punish it to somehow get there, right?
Exactly.
So, certainly our brain is really appealed towards some type of loss or risk, but it's not the most effective way to really improve ourselves. And I think that really is a great point, that failure really is in the mindset of the individual. And I think that's one of the things that with this conference is really to try to highlight that, yes, these things exist. But what I think is also important is that not just providing solutions, but here's what the actual peer-reviewed empirical evidence says.
I knew you're going back to
about how to actually make these improvements. So again,
right. Evidence-based.
we shouldn't think that we know
Yes.
everything. Let the data actually speak to that, and that's one of the things that I really strive for, that now you can walk away with this, what the actual data says about why we succumb to these, and hopefully some opportunities to improve upon them.
Yeah, and I think in closing out our time together, what I would unequivocally say is one thing that we learned, because we followed the surveys, we looked at all the data, we looked at what everybody wrote in, and overwhelmingly there was a void for the female community to have this type of knowledge, to have these type of conversations, and meeting people that they had never met before. Because in so many instances, I'll see the same faces. So it was so cool planning this, because I got to meet so many amazing and new people through the whole process. But just like the Women's March, how do you follow up on that?
Right.
Like, it's a great energy, right? Like, it's a great energy to be within the confines of Washington and all those people, and, you know, certainly, you know, being apolitical in this case. I just want to continue to move forward. I'm not going to be talking about who is or isn't present. I just know as a gender we want to continue to move forward, and I want to help mentor that movement in that direction. Yeah. And I think that, you know, again, at the conference, what we've done is it's just a half a day. Yep. You come at noon, you have your lunch. Ideally, you exercise your brain, sit with somebody different. Yeah. You know, ditch your friend that you maybe drove there or will drive home with, and have a different type of conversation, and be uncomfortable, and know that that's great and normal. Right. But it only will get easier with that type of exercise. And then we go into your presentation, and then, you know, you're going to be, you know, giving us your evidence-based information about this subject matter as it relates to, you know, women. And then Mary Wilson, who is Ralph Wilson's, you know, widow. It's just amazing to see an individual like that who hasn't been front and center, and listen to the amazing things that she has done. And I just think having samples like that are so inspirational, because she's not, you know, this high energy, in your face type of person that, again, we stereotypically would think would be out there. And Mary Owen, Ralph Wilson's niece, who's been, you know, started in a capacity with him and grew to a strategic position during his tenure in ownership, and at 28 years old was you know, having conversations with, you know, Mr. Kraft from the New England Patriots. Like, it was nothing. Like, it was her neighbor. Yeah. You know, what is that message? What can we learn from that? And then we go right from that into a tour, because it would be disrespectful not to see the behind the scenes of our beloved professional sports team that someday we're going to be winning the Super Bowl from. God save us. And everybody really wanted alcohol. Oh. They all wanted alcohol. So we listened, and we're ending it with a happy hour. So everybody really missed that whole networking, let's have a drink type of piece. So we added that in as well. So it's a great noon to, you know, 4:35, whatever the case may be. It's not a busy time of year for the stadium. Yeah. So, you know, until they kick us out, which I'm not going to lie. After our Christmas party, we see that those things can happen. We tend to be good at having fun. So any parting comments? You know, I know we're going to be doing this monthly, and I encourage people that, again, if there's a topic they'd like to send in. Austin, do you want, February 15th. Thank you so much, Austin. He's reminding us of the date, February 15th. Buy your tickets. We're almost sold out. So thank you for that push. But anything else, Austin, that you, before I ask Erickson, if anything you can, you know, you can touch base with us. Our website for the conference is womenupconferences.com. APA Solutions is our company website. Career Reform is our candidate portal. And my Twitter is @JoanGracie. I'm always on Twitter. Love to engage with you that way. LinkedIn, Joan Gracie. So be happy to take topics in any way, shape, or form from that perspective. And Howard, you get to have the last words.
Yeah, I think the Women's Up Conference is going to be a great opportunity for attendees to see from so many different people, from such different backgrounds, and leave with it that's something hopefully that resonates with them to make it their year. Right? We're in the beginning of the January year. Make this as an opportunity to improve yourself for 2017. You Inc., for example, and really invest that 4 hours at least in how to improve yourself and knowing what obstacles can prevent you from doing so.
That sounds wonderful. You've inspired me.
That's good.
So thank you for that. So great. Thank you for spending your time. Please be looking for us on a monthly basis, and we'll look forward to catching up again soon.